so I'll just toss straight over to them and let them get on with it. And we'll take questions at the end then.
Yeah. I think this is the first time I've been locked in a room where there's only water. So, thank you very much for the invite. Roger had originally asked myself to have a chat with regards rest and recovery and issues just sort of surrounding that. And then we had a chat then afterwards, because there is some stuff on the recovery side of things and getting that balance right, and the whole side of injuries and rehab. But as a group of physios in the province, we've been doing a lot of work with the Sports Institute and the county physios from the various counties. And there's been a number of sort of bits and pieces come out. One of the documents came out last year, most people are probably familiar with, was the Gaelic groin, and say there's some bit of work that's been done. So Chris is going to do the second half where he's going to sort of talk through some of the recommendations that have come out of that and some of the other stuff that we're looking at. I'm going to go cover mainly the sort of rest recovery side of things, and not necessarily, I mean, it's not teaching you old hat, but it's just probably a refresher, and also maybe giving you an update on anything that's new in there. Again, probably from my side of things, I'm coming at it from the senior county point of view. Okay, so again, you have to take this into context, and I suppose when you go away from here and then you decide at what level you're working at, whether it be at club underage level or whether it be through various inter-county squads. But again, there will be bits out of this that everybody should be able to use or refresh on. Okay. I make no apology for this, but to start off understanding recovery, you have to understand the whole principle about training. Okay, and people in the room, some people may come from a sports science background, some people may not. So we all know that the basic principle of training is designed to overload the system and fuel sources, and then basically, if we train hard enough, then we get a training response. So we know that that's normal. That's what we expect. If we train too hard, you put too much stress on the system, then we can get more increase in fatigue, and then we have an automatic knock-on effect on performance. Okay? So as physios, we're interested from an injury point of view, as coaches probably interested from a performance point of view. But there's so much overlap here that it's important sort of to talk about performance and injuries as well. If we just did the training bit alone and we forgot about the adaptation bit, then we would get that. We'll get that recovery, that bottom line there. It'll eventually recover. If we introduce some form of recovery, then what you will see is that you can start to train that wee bit quicker. So that could be the difference between training on a Monday night and training on a Thursday night, or it could be the difference in 2 to 3 days. So we all know that that's what everybody expects, so everybody understands that. Okay. And if it was that easy, it would be great. Okay. So one of the key things, and say this is a cornerstone for coaches, and again, I'm not here to teach you to suck eggs, but these are the people that are involved in coaching and training. Okay. But from a point of view of understanding how the body adapts, it's important that whenever we look at performance, it's a fine line between how much we keep pushing and maximising performance, or putting too much on and then potentially having the other side, which is potentially starting to go down the injury route. Okay, so it is a juggling act, and that's what obviously this talks about, is sort of discussing sort of some of the things which will help us look at the balancing of training and recovery. And again, it goes back to this fundamental principle of progressive overload. There's a very good quote down here. It says, the body does not get fitter through exercise, it gets fitter through recovery from exercise. Okay. We all concentrate on the training bit, getting the training bit done. Even at inter-county level, even at senior level, even at the elite sport level, sometimes the recovery bit is the bit that gets forgotten about, okay, or gets sort of second-class citizen, okay. We should be sort of an equal partnership, okay, because if we don't have an equal partnership, then something will happen, okay. And obviously, from our point of view, maybe injury, from yours, it might be performance. Okay, and then this is say when you get this overload when it goes wrong, you can't cope with it, you get breakdown. Your players or the people involved, there may be other signs and symptoms, so they may end up having, the classic was people would turn overtraining, okay, and then that may have a knock-on effect, things like sleep. So we'll talk briefly about overtraining. Okay, but today's really mainly about recovery and recovery strategies. Like everything in life, this is not just about rest and recovery. This is about like your work, your family, everything else. So you do have to balance things out. Okay, and this training and recovery is the exact same idea. There has to be a balance somewhere. Okay, so that sort of just set the scene. This is what whenever we talk about then balancing the rest and recovery, this is a very nice diagram. It gives you an idea then of the whole spectrum. So when you undertrain and you over-recover, you're not going to get much effect on the performance. Okay? When you get your optimal recovery and your optimal training, then you will get that peak in your performance. So you'll get up to that high level. This is where the problem starts to occur, is that when we under-recover and we train too hard, then we start to fall off the cliff. Okay, so we start to get into that overtraining syndrome and serious under-recovery. So you sort of get the picture. You can train hard, you can recover well, you can get that peak, but then sometimes if you either do too little on the recovery side of things, you'll have it. And it's very hard to get back from that sometimes when you do too much. Okay, it's not like just take a week or two or take 2 or 3 days off. Sometimes it's like going over that cliff face. Okay, so you've literally gone to that age where physically you cannot get back. Okay, or it's going to take you a while. So as coaches, key things that we're talking about, or key things that we feel that are important to get a message out, is how do you monitor that? Okay, and there's various things out there that people talk about, with various squads, certainly for the GA, there's things like sports tracker, people have training diaries, even just a simple diary, just where they record what they're doing. So monitoring what people do is important, because that can sort of help give you an idea of how much training. And the question you're always asked, and certainly if I'm covering training, somebody come in, my hamstring's a bit tight, should I go and train? Okay, yes, hopefully, and hopefully you don't pull it. No. So again, you can't just answer that question on when someone says, I'm a bit tight, okay? Because the first question says, what have you done? What were you doing yesterday? Okay, have you done any recovery? Have you had a history of a problem before? So there's lots of questions that you would ask whenever it comes to that, but that's a key thing there. How much stress is too much, okay? And it's individual. And managers don't like to be told that each player, some people react differently, okay? So again, from a coaching point of view, it's important that you sort of be aware of that. Some people, if you do a training session which is collective, some people may respond completely different. And some people who maybe are at it for years respond well. Some people are maybe new into squads, or maybe have moved up a grade. That may be harder for them. So you just need to be wary of those types of differences in your squads. And one of the key things is to, and this is hard sometimes for footballers in particular. Again, I make no apology, yes, hurlers the same, I come from a hurling background, and we're all the same. How does an athlete feel, okay? Men don't talk, okay, we know that, okay? So sometimes if somebody feels a bit sore, a bit tight, a lot of the time you just bother, okay? And as coaches, and certainly as managers and as people involved in squads, that's very much so part of your job to get that message across, basically. And you may pick up when somebody's not feeling well, okay, and you'll see signs and symptoms. And if you get to know a squad after, it doesn't take too long to figure out not everything goes, okay. So that bit there about how people feel is important. You can look at numerous factors, and there's questionnaires, and there's tons of stuff out there. I'm not going to teach you that, but again, simple things like quality of sleep, how much sleep do you get, what type of sleep is good sleep, things like rest and heart rate, fatigue level, muscle soreness. Okay, so there's tons of stuff there that you can look at, but you have to look at it then in a planned environment. So when you're looking at things like recovery, do they plan it into their diary that they're doing X, Y, and Z? So if they train on a Monday night, they will go to the pool on a Tuesday. Is that recorded? So again, when they look back at the week or the month, they can say, yeah, the X amount of training sessions I've done X amount of this. So again, those are very simple things to help. Red flags are what we look for whenever somebody does too much. Okay, so if we're looking at the overtraining syndrome, key things that you'd be looking for. Okay, and these are classic. I sort of going through this last night, and I thought, God, I think I hit the boxes on a lot of them. But again, it's not from a training point of view. It's just from a point of view of getting up at 6 o'clock every morning and having a child at break at 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Okay, so you get the idea is that some of these are common symptoms that people have. If you're dealing with a professional athlete who may be able to lock themselves in another bedroom and not have to get up during the night, and have a very understanding wife that says, yeah, that's fine, you may find that some of your players or people involved, they may recover fantastic. Lots of people that we deal with are, and I mean this in the best sense of the word, are normal, and they don't have the luxury that maybe some of the elite performers have. So they have a job, they have families, they have social lives, all sorts of other things to take into consideration. So when you add in the training on top of that, and then lack of recovery, it's not uncommon that you'll get some of these things. So we see a lot of this, people with coughs, colds, flus, difficulty concentrating, general apathy, self-esteem. Sometimes somebody come back from an injury, they rehab well, they just don't feel great, they're nearly afraid to go back. So there's loads of things. Those are the classic red flags you're looking at for somebody that's maybe done too much. Okay? It's not that they haven't done enough training, it's usually the complete opposite, they've gone the other way. Okay? So again, those have been talked about before, and those are key things to look out for. From a physio point of view, and don't worry about what's on the slide, from a physio point of view, when we talk about monitoring things, one of the key things we talk about is screening. Okay, and screening has been quite relatively new within sort of Gaelic football or within Gaelic sports. So screening players, functional movement screens, musculoskeletal screens, and screens give us a baseline. These are things which measure us where we are now, and then whenever either we get injured, we can go back and look, has it either improved, got better. So this is a simple example of some of the screening tests that we do with the Tyrone senior squad. And there's nothing exciting in that. These are all basic things, looking at the ankle range of movement, looking at adductor strength, the groins, looking at hip movements. And we'll measure these, but we know that if somebody can only, say, do this test where they can only move their knee over their toe 3 or 4 centimetres, we know that that's potentially going to be something like an Achilles problem. Because the difficulty is if you don't have the range of movement, then they may not have a problem with it, but it's identified as a problem. Okay, so you then need to introduce your corrective exercises, or you need to do something which is going to improve that. So screening is really important when we talk about rest and recovery. Okay, but I say we're not going into detail what's in. This is a snapshot just of our screen, which we done at the pre-season, and you can see, without actually seeing what's on it, you can see there's a number of red boxes throughout that, and that's a squad of whatever, 35. And there's a lot of amber boxes in it. So in general terms, for a lot of the tests that we look at, we've got lots of issues. Well, we got rid of most of the old guys. So the problem is we've got a lot of the young fellas coming through, they've got lots of issues. So again, that's where we know that we've work to do. We rarely get people coming in at the county level. So if that's at the end of the county level, you'll be guaranteed when you start to take a step back from that you'll have lots of these problems everywhere. Okay. The question with this is that screening's great, you have to do something about it. If you don't do anything about it, it's a waste of time. Okay? So for each of these problems that you identify, then you need to be able to correct it. And when you talk about recovery, if you don't correct these problems, somebody could get injured as a result of it. So this sort of ties the whole thing. Other things then outside of your screening is, from a physio point of view, sometimes we may look at very specific things. We'll look at how somebody moves. Okay? I'll give you an example of some simple tests that we may look at. But again, these are not by no stretch of the imagination.
Just tab it maybe on the screen.
Now, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that this is somebody who has a major issue with jumping and landing. I'm just going to play the game just so that you see it. If I told you that this was somebody that tore her ACL twice, and coming from a background of ladies football, you can sort of say, okay, I can see why. So we look for things which are going to give us an idea that maybe that person doesn't move very well. Okay. Again, this is another person for my sins. I seem to get people that always end up having repeated ACL tears. So this is somebody who had 3 ACL reconstructions, and he only has 2 knees. And if you look at again, just to set the scene, if you look at this is your ankle, this is your knee, and you can see it should be the same as the ankle. It should stop and go, and this is the hip. And whenever we just put a tracker on it, you can see there's this increase in wobble with the knee and increase in wobble. Okay, so when we talk about screening, we're looking to see, can we identify things which maybe are not normal? So whereas this fellow's had been rehabbed by various other people before, whenever we look at him, we say, you don't move very well, you're going to re-rupture unless you actually correct that. So again, when we're talking about recovery, and rehab, it's important that you get sort of the right people addressing some of the issues. So, and for our sins, and Davy Hart is quite happy for me to play this video. This was an inter-county player, and all I've asked him to do is simply hop up and do a step. And I asked him to nail a landing, and you can even see on this side he's still waiting to go. And that was somebody at the peak of his inter-county career. So sometimes there's some screening tests that we look at that we would expect should be okay. And his problem was a groin, so it wasn't even an ankle or anything like that, but his just general movement was poor. So that was before he started on about 6 or 9 months of rehab. Okay. So again, screening is useful, but it's only useful then if you can then build that into your whole program. Monitoring groin is one of the things Chris will talk about, but this gives you an idea. Sometimes at a training session we may use a biofeedback cuff, and it's just a BP cuff which you squeeze. So on the screening test, one of the things that we identify is maybe how strong the adductors are, and then you may monitor it through the season. For a lot of guys that have a history of a groin problem, whenever they come to training, we just ask them, do a quick squeeze. It takes us less than 5 seconds to get a recording. But if I record it at every training session, you can see if somebody is sore, if somebody drops their power, they'll not be complaining that the groin is sore. Okay, that makes sense? So whenever they squeeze, it's an early warning system. So if I let this person continue to train here, then what will happen is that they will fall off that cliff. They will come to me in 2 weeks, 3 weeks time, and they will have that chronic groin pain which will have difficulty in settling. Okay? So sometimes being able to monitor things like this, you can just say, listen, pull out training for a week, let's get you settled down. And instead of them falling off the cliff face, then you get a chance to sort of rehab them. So monitoring is really important, and that's a nice way of monitoring. You can sort of get a rough idea that through the rest of the season that's fine. Okay? And you can do that for every single player, But again, it depends on what level you're going to take this. If somebody had a history of groin pain, this would be really useful for them, just to keep an eye out, should I train or should I not? Okay? Let's say Chris will go into more detail on that. So the recovery side of things then, which is the sort of another bit we're going to allude to. Planning your recovery, okay? Most of you, many of you are involved with actual squads or teams in the room, just to show of hands roughly. So how many of you, if you're doing a training session, will plan your training session in advance? Show of hands. Okay. So how many of you actually plan your recovery session? Okay. So get the general gist. Okay. You all plan your training. You all know what you're going to do. You may plan, that you're going to do that this week, and you're going to, over the next couple of weeks, you're going to progressively load it. You may not know that that's what you're doing sometimes, but you're going to make things harder over a period of time. You're going to take the championship, so you progressively load. Okay. How many of you plan your recovery? That's the issue. And that's not just an issue with coaches, it's an issue with players. And a lot of times with players, we don't drop that message through to them. Okay, you're going to train hard tonight, but you need to recover well because you're going to be training hard again on Wednesday night or Thursday night. Okay, so that planning recovery is important. Doing recovery sessions, and then monitoring it again, and then going back through that loop. So again, just make us aware of key things. Now, I put this in just, again, apologies for being a busy slide, but this was to give you an idea of how you should think in relation to a simple idea of like recovery within a training session, okay? What is appropriate and what is not appropriate. Because a lot of people think of recovery as what you do then after training, but sometimes it's also to do with what you do within the session and what type of session that you're doing. So whether it's a weight session, whether it's a speed session, whether it's an endurance session. So a very simple idea is, if you're doing something which is like a 10-second sprint, okay, very simple idea is in relation to the work-rest ratio, okay. So if I work for 10 seconds, which is my sprint, then I should be not doing anything for at least somewhere between 30 and 50 seconds. I would actually probably say longer, okay. Now, how many times has somebody done a sprint and they haven't even got their breath and they're away again, okay? So the issue there is when you start to not allow the body to recover, then you start to go into fatigue, okay? The more you fatigue, the higher the risk that you will get lactic acid. the higher the risk of injuries and everything else. So we talk about quality within your training session, all right? And I'm not saying that you start to go easy on everybody, okay? But it may mean that your session, well, if you're doing speed stuff, your session might become shorter. You may start off with less initially, and then you build it up. Because if everybody goes out at the beginning of the season and all does the same thing at the beginning of the season, at the middle of the season, you will get all your groin and your hamstrings up straight away. Because everybody, the first 2 or 3 years, oh, they're hanging off me, okay? Sometimes it may have been easier just to taper your training so you go a wee bit easier first, and then you gradually build it up. So again, that just gives you a simple idea. Starting off with something like 5 sprints, once or twice a week, eventually up to 15 sprints 3 times a week, not exceeding 20 minutes. And again, I'm not preaching to you in relation to that, but I'm just sort of trying to set the scene. When you do your training, just think about trying to plan it and progress it out as well. So think that that's part of your recovery work when you do that. Periodisation, Chris is going to talk hopefully a bit about. So again, if I was an Olympic athlete, I might plan my training over a 4-year period. Okay, so this may be what I'm looking at here. So how I build it up. If I am an inter-county player, this might be come championship time. If I play under 21s, football and college football, and play for our county senior team, where do I fit all this? Because we've guys supposed to be competing for Sigerson coming up soon, and then we've guys that will be playing for under 21s, and then all of a sudden then later in the summertime. So in theory, some managers will want their players to be peaking now. Some managers will want their players to be peaking in 2 months' time. Some managers will want their players to be peaking in 4 months' time. So that's a problem, okay? And it's a problem for the whole issue about rest and recovery, okay? And again, you get guys coming, they've just done a plyometric session on a Friday night, and they land down on us with another team. Could be their club team, could be their college team, and then they land down on a Sunday for a county training session when it's only the early season, and they can't sit down because they've got such bad muscle soreness, because what they're doing with one level isn't balancing itself out. So again, that's a problem. I'm not solving the problem, but that's a problem in that what I said is that you need to be aware of that, what happens outside of what you do with it. So again, when you look at that whole idea of periodization, recovery and overtraining is really important. And again, I put these things on the slide because the guys have sort of said, I think there's going to be handouts available, so you can sort of read through some of the stuff in a bit more detail. But the key thing with this is periodization planning. It's just about giving your body time to repair and recover. And I had this slide from before, and I haven't taken it off. I deliberately left it up there because I thought it was quite ironic in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But yeah, recovery isn't the end of your game. Whoever recovers the fastest does the best. Yeah. I was going to put a wee IV drip up there, but I think again, yeah, read what you want as well. Okay. So rest and recovery. We've talked briefly about it. And rest is the time that you need to recover, and recovery is the time required for the body to repair. Okay. This is an interesting quote. We'll just go back there. It says, "It pays to plan ahead. It wasn't raining when the Noah's Ark was built." All right. So again, take a step back, build that into it, think about it, okay? You all put in the planning into your training bit, but it's the planning into your recovery bit we were just talking about. And this is a very good sort of summary of the strategies that are out there for recovery, okay? Everybody's looking for the new fancy fangled thing that's out there, okay? And you know, open therapy, minus 110 degrees, yeah, all these things are great, and there's lots of very fancy things, but there's a lot of very basic stuff that you probably need to do to get to add those other bits in, if that makes sense. So apologies, this looks clear on my computer, but doesn't come very well. Down at the very bottom, level 1, rest, passive and active, and we'll talk through these in a bit more detail. Sleep, nutrition, and that includes your refueling and your rehydration. So this bit here, sleep, is probably your king of recovery. Okay? On average, show of hands, how many people in this room would get 8 hours sleep a night? Okay. How many people would probably get less than 6? Okay. So one of the big things is that simple idea of 6, 7, 8 hours, what is recommended? Some people, there is debate over it, but most people would say minimum 7, probably 8. If you can do longer than that, great. Okay. whenever you work and you do everything else, you know, sometimes you need to be going, they're coming in from work, doing the training session, come home, and they go to bed and get up the next morning. So we know, speaking to some players, you know, they don't go to bed, you know, at 10 o'clock at night. Okay. I know I'm still driving home from gym at 10 o'clock at night. I know I'm getting in from gym near 11 o'clock at night. So I'm sure a lot of players in the same boat. And if I'm getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, by the time I sit down, have a cup of tea, I'm lucky if I get 6 hours sleep. But again, I'm not training at an inter-county level. But that will be quite common. 6 hours sleep probably would be common. Okay. So sleep is down there. That's your biggest recovery strategy. So those basic things, talk about basic. So rest, sleep, nutrition. Okay. If everybody did that well, we'd be happy. Okay. Second bit then is looking at periodization. So that's changes to training and planning your training. And I put in reactive programming in there, and that's particularly for coaches. So if you lie down to a training session, your training session on a Monday was particularly tough, and you're going again on a Wednesday night, and you think in your head you know what you're going to do, but you start to see everybody sore after that. That's being able to change your program and not just decide that you're just going to do your program because you sat down last night and you've got all planned out. So again, build that into recovery, that you can change your program, react to change. Cool down and stretching's in there. Level 3, recovery work. So recovery pool work, compression skins, ice baths, massage, contrast bath. So again, we're going up this further. And then at the very top, we've got various things like psychological, environmental, and we'll talk hopefully in a wee bit more detail on those. Sleep, king of recovery. Okay. I've already sort of talked to it, but in a recent study in the Australian Institute of Sport, where they did a big symposium last year on recovery, they said that 88% of elite athletes had less than 8 hours sleep per night, and the recommendation is at least 8 hours sleep, so 88% of elite. They talk about a thing called sleep latency, and that's where somebody quickly falls asleep. And it's quite funny whenever you're standing up here, or if you're talking to students or something like that, and you're having a conversation, you're talking, and the head starts going, okay? And it's quite, if you're on a bus with players, some players will actually nod off very quickly. So lots of athletes that don't get enough sleep have this sleep latency. They fall asleep a lot quicker, okay? That's a sign of potential fatigue as well. But what, if you're well rested, it should probably take you about 7 or 8 minutes to go for a nap. Okay. If you're fatigued, you'll probably fall asleep within 5 minutes. Okay. And again, so just to be aware of those things. Now, hopefully you'll be able to fall asleep during the training session. And so how do you see that? And it's again just making people aware. Identify some basic things. You know, so talk to people about not staying up late. That's usually scorned at. Again, what time do you do your training session at? You know, I was reading stuff on Bolt, and the Jamaicans have some of their training sessions at 5 o'clock in the morning. And you sort of have to think, well, why would you have sprinters out at 5 o'clock in the morning starting their training session? And then again, you have to think, well, you think of who he is, and he probably has a party life. And if he knows that he's got a training session at 5 o'clock in the morning, it automatically will hinder their nightlife activity. So yeah, some managers will deliberately do early morning sessions, but sometimes it can be counterproductive because you still have your players that still do the nightlife bit, and they get a couple of hours of kicking the land out to training. So again, it's that balancing thing. Okay. So identify sleep opportunities, hygiene. So talking about your temperature, quiet, no TV in the bedroom. I don't do it. Okay. Power nap really important. Right. If somebody can put their head down for half an hour during the day, it's a great recovery strategy. Again, if you're working out on site, you're not going to be able to do that. But sometimes that half an hour tip. But it really shouldn't be any more than 30 to 45 minutes maximum. Okay. You start to sort of sleep for an hour or two during the day to defeats the purpose of that. Okay. I'm talking about a thing called sleep debt. It's the same as getting the debt to the bank. Okay. If you miss an hour or two of sleep, okay, you have to pay that back at some stage, or you need to get extra hours of sleep. So if you're having debt every night, then that's just building up and building up. It doesn't go away. Okay. It builds up in your system. So eventually it has a side effect. And what we say to a lot of our guys is, come championship, try to get to bed an hour earlier. Try to think a month before championship, try to sort of get to bed that hour earlier. Even that as a simple rule of thumb can have a massive knock-on effect. Okay. Rest in between sessions is important, okay? And having active rest days, okay? And if I train today, well, rest tomorrow, active rest means you loosen out the legs, so you're going for a walk, cross-training a bike, something very gentle. I should be able to hold a conversation. I shouldn't be out of puff having it, okay? So it's just to get that blood flow, okay? And then passive rest is something like, read a book, listen to music, chilling out basically. I put flotation down in there, and again, I think in Northern Ireland there's one flotation centre, so we'll talk about it at the very end. I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but again, key things for most trainers are the whole idea of refueling and repair. So again, coming in straight after training session, making sure that you're getting some carbohydrates straight into the system. Again, you have these golden opportunities and windows of opportunity to get protein as well into the system for regeneration. So again, the whole idea of getting that within that hour of the training session is important. And sometimes that may be in the form of a protein shake or something like that, and then they may get their dinner or food later on. But again, there's those windows of opportunity that are important. And rehydration. And again, people talk about measuring your fluid, measuring your weight before and afterwards, see how much you lose, and then rehydrating that loss. Okay. So again, there's stuff on that. Recovery drinks, great industry. Type in Google recovery drinks, and you'll get many million hits. Okay. Which one do you recommend? Well, don't recommend any of them. And that all you're looking at is in most of these, the ratios of them are 3 to 1 carbohydrate to protein, and that may be useful for some of you people immediately following training. Okay, but I say some of them, if you went into the spar shop and you bought a milkshake, you probably have the same idea of carbohydrate to protein, but there'll probably be a higher sugar content. So you just get fatter taking that, but you'll probably still get the benefit of the protein in it. So again, most of these ones here have reduced sugar content. So again, whichever one tickles your fancy. I think this is the one that probably promoted a lot in sort of UK athletics and stuff like that. But again, there's none particular there that I would recommend. General thing in relation to recovery, and this is probably something which is not new, but it's something which a lot of people do. It's just simple things like antioxidants. Okay, it used to be that people took a lot of vitamin C and vitamin E, and people actually thought that maybe it might be actually detrimental to recovery. Whereas a lot of the antioxidants, if you think of any of the fruits which are nice colours, one of your reds or purples and stuff like that, high strong colours, fairly high concentration of antioxidants. Antioxidants are useful because when you damage muscle, you get what's called free radicals. That's what makes you sore. Okay, so you have to mop that stuff up. Antioxidants can help mop that up. So again, it's part of a recovery strategy. If you were just doing that on its own, it wouldn't be enough. But again, something simple to think of. Cool down and stretching before sessions and after sessions. Again, so the whole idea of static stretching, dynamic stretching. There's still stuff out there. Research still suggests that static stretching might impair performance beforehand. Okay. Why do we recommend static stretching? If somebody's tight, they still need to increase the range of movement. So, but it mightn't be before the performance make away from the scene. And then again, post-activity, again, you would still be encouraging that in those 10 or 15 minutes of doing your cool down, you will still have some form of stretching in there. Okay, so those are part of the important recovery strategy. Any Man United fans in here? Probably not too many, but the likes of the Ryan Giggs of this world will profess to things like yoga and Pilates, okay, in that prolonging their career. And again, yoga is a form of obviously stretching, okay, and you'd be surprised that when you look at some intercounty footballers attempt to do some basic, what I would call basic yoga maneuvers or yoga stretches, they're rubbish. So again, if it's the case that you have a person in particular that's got really poor general mobility, poor flexibility, they may never do the exercises at home, but they might go to the gym if there's a 20-year-old teaching a yoga class. So again, it might be a good idea to actually try to get them into that, and that actually does work. There's a video instructor, Mark Allen. So, right. So other things, pool recovery sessions. Again, you can see here it's not dynamic. Okay, a lot of it's gentle when you go into the pool. You shouldn't be out of puff in there. So again, the key thing is that ideally it should be standing if you're doing pool sessions. It should be up to the neck region if possible. And this is interesting in that the pressure in the water, what's called the hydrostatic pressure, so when you go into the water, it will squeeze your body. You get 7 times more compression from going up in the water up to your neck on your body than you will with wearing your compression garments like your skins. Okay, so if you want a better compressive effect, better jumping into the pool for 15 minutes than wearing your skins. Okay? Now skins do help, but in general terms in relation to giving compression, the simple pool stuff works. Okay? And again, lots of these things are in vogue and then they go out of vogue and then they go in, and different people do it for a while and drop out of it. But certainly pool recovery sessions still there, very effective. Okay? Lots of stuff in there. Okay. Cryotherapy. Okay. Yes, there's lots of debate. Should I, shouldn't I? Does it affect my performance? Does it help recovery? Do I use a temperature controlled unit which keeps the temperature the same? Do I use something like an ice bath which has got the ice at the top? You know, at the end of the day, a lot of the players sometimes will, some people will say yes, they definitely feel it helps them. Some people say it definitely doesn't. You know, if people like these guys say that they feel it definitely helps them recover and they can perform at their level, should you knock it? I think there is a lot of benefit in what players feel. Okay. Now, at the same time, there is some guidelines in relation to what temperature the water should be. If you're going to do what's called contrast therapy, which is usually hot and cold, there's probably more benefit, personally for me, in that if they're using hot and cold rather than just cold water immersion, which would be these ones. So if you're going to use that, then either they get into a hot shower, a jacuzzi, stuff like that. The other thing is the basic idea is they start off cold and they finish cold. Okay, so it gives you an idea. Garments, multi-million-pound industry, everybody uses them. And again, use them during training and then after training. Okay? So the whole idea of wearing them at night time or sleeping them, okay? Wearing them for a couple of hours for training is important. It has to be comfortable. I wouldn't force guys to wear them at night time and sleep in them if it's not comfortable, because it has a knock-on effect on their sleep quality. Okay? But if they're comfortable, you can wear them for the next morning time and take them off. Massage, self-massage, in an industry where you have to pay, obviously, to get a massage, you're better off teaching players to do it themselves if they possibly can. So you can get various things which will allow them to do it themselves. You've got to be thinking of trigger points and really getting in and releasing all those knotted areas, those stuck down areas, those trigger points, for want of a better word. Okay? And again, massage has been shown to have a positive effect, but again, with lots of the recovery stuff, a lot of the research is not too sure. But a lot of people will say to you they feel better if they get a massage. So again, massage is one of those things that certainly we would advocate a lot. And again, when you feel tissue, sometimes you can feel knots which you wouldn't feel if you were stretching, or players don't feel it. And certainly, whenever you put hands on, if you mobilise those areas, then hopefully you're hoping that will prevent injury. And again, a lot of people will use trigger points or foam rolls or these wee things which are called the grid, which you can buy on Amazon. Okay. Right. Flotation tanks that I'm not going to talk too much about. Psychological, yes, at the very top level, useful. Okay. But you start to see, have you got the skills to do these? A lot of people don't. Okay. Mental toughness, relaxation. Okay. Debriefing. Okay, so a lot of that stuff is very, very high level. And again, I wouldn't, if it goes into a manager who wants to do that stuff, that's great. But that's the very sort of extremes, that's the top end. Okay, time-wise, what were we fixing? Chris, we'll do that. Yeah. So, we're basically there. So, that's a very snapshot sort of through what is current. Other things like recovery days is important, so having days where they're allocated to maybe do lots of the different things together. Okay, we'll run through the second bit, and say what it might do is it might tie some of the stuff a wee bit better together than in relation to some of the things that have been done currently in relation to drawings and some of the other projects that are looking.
Thanks, mate. Guys, listen. When you listen to that, you realise that you need a large dose of common sense to apply a lot of this stuff. And I hear you talk about, you can definitely plan your training, but your athletes leave you use it with other squads. So there's obviously a huge challenge for any coach work within Gaelic football. I'm a physiotherapist to work up at the Sports Institute, but I also coach in local club in Osprey, and also with Kevin Lynch's hurling under 14, under 16. So what I want to do was speak about a project that the Sports Institute and Ulster GA sort of helped or put together and delivered last year, and there was some relevance to the whole theme of rest and recovery within that. So to give you a wee bit of the context on that, so our experience within the Sports Institute of Gaelic footballers who come into the academies over a period of 5-6 years was that in that talented young Gaelic footballer, aged between sort of 17 to maybe 22, 23, there was this very, very high risk of developing chronic groin pain. A lot of these individuals who were, as I say, the talented ones, playing for a number of teams, usually county level footballers, a lot of them unfortunately ended up needing to go for surgery for groin problems. So we're looking at a 24% risk of those players breaking down with chronic groin pain, which is exceptionally high. So that was when we went to Ulster Jabe, this was a project we felt we could really help change. And what we've done with this problem was over a couple of years put in place deliberate injury prevention mechanisms, and were able to reduce the risk of injury. So this was also perceived to be a big problem within county Gaelic football as well as within the academy system. So essentially there's a think tank put together where we pulled in coaches, county sort of sports medicine teams and ourselves and says, right, how big is this problem and what do we think's causing it? And we worked through a process where we identified a lot of the issues, and I've picked out the ones that are relevant to this. If anybody's interested, this document's available online, which has a lot of recommendations about for the coach as well as managing chronic groin pain from a clinician's point of view. So key issues identified with the chronic groin pain, most frequently observed in that athlete who engages in a high volume of training over an extended period of time. And the types of training that was, bringing that on, and this is the same for Australian rules football as it is for soccer and any of the multi-directional sort of field sports, high volume of sprinting, twisting, turning, kicking. So and that carried out over a number of years. Athletes who started to have symptoms tend to struggle on through them for a prolonged period of time before they often sought help. And unfortunately, once that had happened, those athletes were much harder to fix. A lot of the athletes would also have gone to seek quick fixes. So if they knew there was somebody that maybe did an injection for this, they would go to find that person, have the injection and straight back to training and playing and not address the problems underlying it. So from that point of view, it was felt that a large part of this was load dependent, so too much load in the system over a long period of time, and to sort it out, the load had to be removed. So essentially, there were different levels of trying to prevent this problem. There was different levels identified. So there was at the level of the athlete, secondary level was with the squad and with the coach, and then on a tertiary level then was with the whole sport. So as part of that, we made recommendations to the GAA on how they could change this problem at a fundamental and a grassroots level. So just as out of interest from a clinician's point of view, we put together this sort of composite of signs and symptoms. So if we took an 18, 19-year-old Gaelic footballer or hurler and we assessed their hips and their strength around their abdominal region and groins, we could identify people we believe to be at risk. So the stiff individual, poor strength, poor abdominal control. So what we were saying is one of these findings in isolation wouldn't necessarily be enough to say you're going to develop groin pain. But if you had someone who was involved in high level of training, training with 2-3 teams, and they were presenting with these sort of, mix of, we've said down here, 4 or more of these clinical signs, we'd be saying that's somebody at high risk. So the key recommendations, and I'll fly through this because I know we're short of time, you just need to get back into the keynote. Key recommendations coming out of this were that you shouldn't train on the pitch more than 4 high intensity sessions in a week. Okay, of which, if you would be including games on that, you shouldn't play any more than 2 games in 1 week. Now bear in mind, some of the people we were seeing at an academy level could be training 9 times a week and playing 3-4 matches. And that's not 1 week, that's not an exceptional week. Some of those guys were doing that, have been doing that for maybe 2 years. Okay. So no more than 4 high intensity training sessions in a week. We're also saying that players shouldn't play any more than a maximum of 38 games in a season. So that, again, interviewing some of the collegiate level athletes, quite often a lot of them coming out of that age group 18, 19, they can attend twice as many as that, especially even if they're a dual player. So we'll avoid high intensity training sessions or high volume kicking practice the day before a game, that seems common enough sense. Avoid long range kicking for a proper warm up in your session. So I know, when I think back to Glenavon, that was you walked out of the changing room and everyone out and wheeling balls 50 yards, as far as you could hit them before training started. This is a key one, and I think it's probably the most difficult one to achieve, is probably for that talented young athlete. So we're thinking about the county saying, the real, that one coming through at 17 and 18 that you'd really like to see make it through. That individual should have a nominated mentor, separate and away from the county setups. So a nominated mentor who could be objective and help decision making through that 17 to 21 age bracket. So helping them decide, week in, week out, month in, month out, what trainings should I go to, what team should I play for, because it's impossible to train and play with everyone. And lastly then, there should be a 2-month cut-off period in every calendar year for players, and during that time it's important that they complement that rest period with strength-based deficits, flexibility and a nice stability training that they might need to do, and that's the time to get involved with a screening programme and follow it up. So we didn't say there, whilst we're saying you shouldn't train any more than 4 times in 1 week on a pitch intensity, that should be complemented with flexibility and strength training. So that individual could still train 7 times a week, but it shouldn't be done as the same thing on a pitch every week, week in, week out. So, looking at steps for preventing chronic groin pain, we were saying on a pre-season, the most common sense thing to do is, there's no bigger predictor of injury than if you've had the problem before, whether it be a hamstring, a back, knee, whatever it is. So if you've had an episode of chronic groin pain before, identify those people, because that's where you want to spend your money if you have a limited resource. Identify people at risk if you're going to, try and deal with it. If you're going to do a pre-season screening,